Well, hello, everyone. It is Kristi. It is Sunday, and therefore it is Weekend Winters. I think I'm a little overexposed to my light. You guys might just have to deal with that. I've got a new setup I'm working on. Things are happening in my room, and so I am currently adjusting. So I feel much closer. I feel very intimate now. I am right up in your face. So hello, everyone, and how are you doing? I hope you had a good week. I hope you're keeping healthy and happy and safe. And everything else is going, if not brilliantly, then at least, like generally mediocre for you. Like really aspire to something amazing in your life. and aspire for, like, if nothing else, mediocre routine. All right, I realized because of the way that I did my setup now, I have to kind of change my screen here before I share with you all. All right, guys, we are here to talk about the philosophy of social science. Actually, I should probably show you that on the big one first. Oh, that's a little bit overexposed as well. Like, no, yeah, it's just everything's way too bright. Can I cover up my light? There you go. Cover up my light. Now you can see it. Dang it, where is that? Hold on. Let's, oh, Kristi, you should really test these settings before you go live. Thing is, I just had, oh, here it is. All right, let's, where's down? Is this one down? Okay, that's a little bit better. A little bit better. Anyway, so before we start, I want to say hi to Lee in the chat. Kevin, there's no Kevin here today. Hi, DN fan, hello, and Angus. How you all doing? All right, we are going to get into some nerdy. Sorry, I'm used to looking up for my camera, but you're right here now. I'm not used to you sitting there. So you're a little bit closer than I'm used to having you. I don't know if this setup is going to stay, because currently my camera is perched on top of a tissue box. Not the most professional setup, but anyway. Yeah, I guess if you guys want to see, I can show you maybe a little bit. There's the screen, there's my light, there's my sound thing, there's my mic and pop filter, and there's my camera where everything is, my laptop, where everything is actually running. Yeah, you guys are sat on top of a Kleenex box. That's where you are, but it's working out just fine. So brilliant. Okay, we're going to discuss we're going to start with chapter 3, which is, what's the name of the chapter? I'm sorry, chapter 4. Wow, I'm going to have to go change my description box notes, because I am all kinds of wrong on what chapter I put up. But it's Science, Nature, and Society, Some Alternatives to Empiricism. And hi, Subwolf, good to see you as well. If you see me like doing this, it's because you are right now in front of my live chat. So I had to, you notice I didn't do it. I switched my spots here, because now I'm blocking my own, I'm putting myself where I'm blocking the screen. It doesn't matter. You guys, this is boring. All right. We do have slides, and I do want to look at them. I've got them up, as you can see. But the wording in this section is quite specific. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to probably read all of it. Spent nearly all day unclogging one of your ears. Oh, I remember I was dating someone who had gone on holiday, got some water in his ear, and it just like wouldn't come out, and they ended up having to like unclog his ears too, go in with like water and stuff and properly clean it out, like a deep cleanse of his ear. And afterwards he said it was strange because he could rub his hands on his jeans and he would hear the sound of his like fingerprints moving against the fabric of the jeans, and it was just not something he was hearing before. So I'm glad your ear is unclogged. I'm sorry it took so long. All right, let's orient ourselves a little bit before we jump into the section on Marxism and science, because again, what we're looking at, what the authors are taking up, is not like an incomplete engagement with Marxism, but rather how Marxism viewed science, and also how other people viewed Marxist use of science as it was being developed, to understand sort of like what science issues they were standing in opposition to or adopting. Let's review the 7 basic doctrines of empiricism and the 4 features of positivism as presented by Benton and Craib. Yeah, right order. Now, I also really want to make it clear the difference between taking an empirical approach and an empiricist approach, because they're going to mean very different things here. Empirical with an AL means observation, means you can see it, engage with it, hear it, something in the physical senses. An empiricist approach or account here is going to refer specifically to the sort of ideal type of empiricism. And not like every single person who's empiricist adopts these views. So we're going to look at contrasting these more ideal types of empiricism and positivism, right? To show where the differences are emerging. And in the last two videos, we looked at problems, I think, of empiricism and positivism, respectively. So when we talk about empiricism, empiricist assumptions are, we have a tabula rasa. We start off as a blank slate. When we're born, we can't just access some sort of already written on our hearts knowledge, independent of anyone ever explaining it to us. Everything comes through sensory perception. 2, genuine knowledge is knowledge that is testable. And so this, of course, rules out like a lot of value statements, but it also rules out, as number 3 is, rules out the unobservable. So there really is no place for God in our theories or in our models, because you'd have to operationalize God and then demonstrate a divine to material causal effect, and then be able to measure it, and you can't do that. If like my explanation is because gods don't exist, but other people might say, that's not how God works, so you can't use that in your scientific methods. You can only use things that are observable and like repeated in nature, right? And like God doesn't perform miracles consistently. It's a very ad hoc process. Hi, Invisible Moose, how you doing? All right, so number 4 is that scientific laws are statements about generally reoccurring patterns. The job of the natural sciences was to identify laws that covered all phenomenon. Right? So gravity doesn't for no reason that you can't calculate operate differently in different places. You can basically, if you understand like how to calculate gravity, then you can assume that given those same conditions, ceteris paribus, it would operate the same in a different environment that had the same rules, right? Or if we want to talk about, like the gravity of the Earth's pull on spaceships, it's so consistent and so reliable that we can use it to basically place satellites in geosynchronous orbit with a place on Earth and count on the fact that gravity is going to keep doing gravity things, right? So we're talking about general covering laws. And when you take that approach to understanding to the role of the sciences, that it's to discover these scientific laws, then if you explain a specific instance of something, like a specific instance of evolution, emerging in microorganisms that have adapted to eat bacteria or adapted to eat plastic because it's in their environment, and ones that had mutations that did allow them to break down plastic had way more food, and so they did better, and so they multiplied, yada, 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 right? If you can demonstrate the process of evolution in this instance, it's referencing the general principles, the general law, right? And when you bring these together, there is an assumption that we in the social sciences question quite profoundly, that if knowing a law should allow you to be able to predict exactly what will happen. There is a symmetry between explaining a phenomenon, describing what the causal mechanisms are that produced it, and predicting an outcome. That is, using your knowledge to accurately estimate what an outcome will be. Right, so all of these are characteristics of empiricism, these attitudes behind them as well. And you can see that with King Crocoduck, right, in his videos. And finally, that scientific objectivity rests on the separation of testable statements from subjective ones. This is, again, bringing up that idea that politics and social and other things don't have, shouldn't influence like your scientific perspective. You should be able to take out subjective evaluations and get down to these objective ones. Now again, when you're working with atoms, when you're working with molecules or quarks or gravity, that's really easy, right? Because those aren't social things that we have created ourselves and embedded values into. I mean, obviously science has a lot of this has a lot of values. This is all values. All of this is values. And you want to say it that way, it is all subjective. What principles have been adopted to establish this criteria of good quality science. But from the natural scientist point of view, what they did was they became this super purity thing of, I'm just going to look at the evidence. And we'll see why that doesn't work with the social world. Okay, so those are the 7 basic doctrines of empiricism. I wish I could get this bigger. Oh, I can. Awesome. All right, you guys should be able to see this so much easier now. Apologies, I didn't do this before. So do you want me to go? I think that's as big as I can get them. As big as I can get it. That's what she said. Oh, Kevin. Even when you're not here, you're all right. I think this pretty much allows you to see what's going on. You don't necessarily need the... How come it's... Oh, I see what I can do. Boom! Pop! There we go. That's what it's looking like. Excellent. All right, so those are the 7 basic doctrines of empiricism, and the 4 features of positivism now build on from this. So positivism is an approach to the study of the social. Well, actually, no. It influences it, right? But there are some values, I should say, embedded in positivism that are oriented toward like the social. So first of all, it's an empiricist account of the natural sciences. So positivists, in this case, an ideal type. Hi, Nil Magnifico. And I said invisible moose already. And Deanne Van, I'm really glad that your ear feels better. Okay, so it adopts those empiricist approaches. It also, in terms of values, like empiricism, thinks that science is either the highest form, like one of the highest forms of knowledge, or is really the only form of, say, special knowledge. It's a very special kind of knowledge because of the process that you go into in order to screen out and filter and hold evidence to certain standards, right? So this empiricist scientific method, in a positive perspective, should be extended to humans and the social world. If we want really awesome, good, reliable knowledge about what humans are doing, then we should use the method that is the most rigorous and holds itself to the highest standards and produces reliable knowledge. These are like not... these aren't, they're generally good goals. Like how you implement them, it gets a little bit harder. And then there's also this underlying initial optimism in positivism that reliable social scientific knowledge will facilitate our ability to control, regulate, and otherwise shape human behavior so that social problems can be solved. If we rely on expertise who look at rates of who look at the link between high school dropouts and juvenile crime, and we can find some way of intervening to keep kids in school longer and keep them, or find kids who have dropped out and put them into a program that gets them restreamed into schooling rather than just leaving them on their own, then in theory we could have an impact on how much juvenile crime is committed, how many kids have to go through the system, how many kids get incarcerated, so forth and so on. So it's a quite optimistic approach to the study of using certain knowledge to the benefit of human society. And we saw in the critiques that people aren't actually always that interested in using science for good. All right, so now we're on to the next section, which is science, nature, and society, some alternatives to empiricism. And as I said, I'm just gonna basically read out a lot of this because it's hard to paraphrase. Again, I'm still so used to looking up. It's hard to paraphrase, and also I don't want to. Sometimes their wording choices is quite precise. So we're just gonna. I'll put on my lady newsreader narrator voice, and gonna read it out to you guys. All right, hold on a second. First, I'm gonna take a drink to warm up my voice. Actually, probably shouldn't be drinking coffee because it's got soy milk in it. But anyway, alrighty dighty. According to Benton and Craib, Until the early 1960s, philosophical thinking about natural science in English-speaking countries was dominated by the various forms of empiricism, together with Popper's falsificationist approach. If you remember, that means you have to make a statement capable of being shown to be wrong in order to meet a scientific criteria, in order to be considered science. So even if an astrologer makes a prediction that, Venus is rising, therefore this will happen, and an astronomer makes a prediction based on, these covering laws, these scientific laws, and there's a possibility of interpreting the results to contradict the theory. In astrology, people can explain away what's going on. Hey, Rory Katz! All right, so falsificationist approach. Both of these traditions were committed to a view of science as radically distinct from other forms of knowledge or belief. And I think that's still true. It's not as clear-cut as they initially thought, but just as ethics produces a certain type of special knowledge, I would say scientific methods applied to questions produce a different type of knowledge than mere anecdote or speculation. Okay. It was held that the rules governing collection and analysis of empirical evidence, admitting only testable, aka falsifiable, statements into the corpus of scientific knowledge, separating fact from value, and so on, made scientific knowledge claims especially reliable. The whole cumulative exercise of science was leading to an ever closer approximation to a true account of the natural world. And this is... all right, so the true account of the natural world, I'm just going to say as we perceive it. Because again, we only can understand what we perceive. So true account of the natural world. Anyway, I'm going to quibble about that. However, they go on to say, as the arguments we review in Chapter 3 became more widely accepted, alternatives to the optimistic view of the rationality and objectivity of science were developed. Indeed, that such alternatives were available was an important condition for loosening the hold of the orthodox empiricist accounts of science. I think that's important too. The natural sciences are still very much in the orthodox empiricist accounts of sciences, whereas the social sciences have been forced, because of the nature of the object of inquiry, to have to really think about more things. The existence and plausibility of these alternatives to empiricism makes it necessary for philosophy of social science to ask new questions about the relationship between natural and social science. The choice is no longer simply between the positivist approach discussed in the previous 2 chapters on the one hand, or an anti-naturalist, hermeneutical, or interpretivist approach, chapters 5 and 6, on the other. This chapter reviews and offers also some limited evaluations of a selection of the non-empiricist accounts of science, as we will see. Despite their important differences, they are generally united in their emphasis on the socially and historically located character of scientific practice. One such alternative view, critical realism, was developed precisely with the relation of the natural to the social sciences in mind. And for this reason, we'll deal with it only very briefly in this chapter, but return to it later in Chapter 8. That's just setting the scene for where we're going to go. They're setting up the framework for this chapter. And the first alternative, although it's kind of not an alternative, as we'll see, and this is why I want to read this out, Marxism's relationship to science is complicated, shall we say. All right, Marxism and science. In the traditional view, I think, the exclusion of moral, social, and political influences from the sphere of scientific discovery and debate was necessary to its objectivity. This is very much, yes, right? We've heard that before, right? This idea of divorcing out anything that isn't just considered rational fact. To a considerable extent, this philosophical view of science was shared by the historians and sociology of knowledge. One tradition stemmed from Marx and Engels. In his early writings, Marx, and this is especially economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, proposed a philosophical view of history according to which private property was viewed as a symptom of human alienation from nature, as well as giving rise to alienation between classes in capitalist society. At that stage of his thinking, Marx's vision of the future good society was one in which alienation among humans themselves and between them and nature would be overcome. In this future society, humans would come to realize their oneness with nature, and the artificial split between social and natural sciences would be overcome. Science would be transformed from a means of domination of both humans and nature into a new kind of expression of the spiritual and aesthetic appreciation of nature, and the various sciences would be reunified. Yeah, it didn't happen. Again, you know, when people are first starting out with these ideas, they're very exciting and they tend to, you know, like over-apply them, shall we say. Things happen and evolve, but this was, like I said, early Marx. It continues. Mr. Saxo Keat, XXO. Morning, everybody. Thank you for that. That was a nice message. All right, continuing. This critique of science as an expression of the alienated relationship between modern capitalism and nature was continued and developed by later social theorists, most especially by the first generation of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, see Chapter 7. These writers were associated with an Institute of Social Research, which was attached to Frankfurt University until the Nazi takeover in 1933, and was subsequently reformed at Columbia University in the U.S. Adorno, Horkheimer, and Marcuse especially retained the early Marx's vision of an unalienated relation to the rest of nature, and the associated critique of the existing natural sciences as mere instruments of human domination of nature. However, Marx's later work seemed to fit more easily with the orthodox 19th century view of science as providing objective and useful knowledge of the world, in contrast to the earlier superstitious and religious worldviews. This kind of links on to, was it Durkheim? We were talking about somebody, I don't think it was Durkheim, that there was a positivist who also had sort of a similar view, that it was the evolution, wasn't it? It was Comte, wasn't it? About when you go from the theological to the metaphysical to the scientific, right? That same notion that knowledge, the forms of knowledge available to humans is progressing. And I can't find exactly where it is, so I'm going to skip it now, but I think I'm remembering that correctly. It's in a previous lecture. Apologies that I don't have that to hand. Moving on. The view of history advanced by Marx and Engels from the late 1840s onwards is one in which advances in human freedom and self-determination are to be won through a twofold struggle, against limits imposed by nature and against class oppression. The former struggle, the one against nature, was being progressively won by the application of scientific knowledge in agricultural and industrial technologies, so harnessing the forces of nature to human purpose and vastly increasing the social wealth. Indeed, the great achievement of modern capitalism was its power the revolutionized. Wait. I can't. That something about that sentence didn't work. Error 404, word not found. Indeed, the great achievement of modern capitalism was its power, to revolutionize, not the revolutionize, to revolutionize the forces of production at a rate and on a scale never seen before. Ooh, didn't mean to touch your Kleenex box. The downside of capitalism, though, was that this vast, constantly advancing apparatus of technical mastery of nature was under the control of one class in society only, so that its direction and the benefits deriving from it only served the interests of this one dominant class, the owners of capital. Increasingly, the scale of social coordination required by the new technologies of production pointed to the need for spreading control to the whole society and giving the benefits of ever-increasing wealth production to everyone. In this approach, the objectivity of scientific knowledge is not questioned by Marx and Engels, nor is the power of science to harness the forces of nature through technology. So you can see how it kind of like early Marxism is slightly different from later Marxism, and so this is why they're like kind of complicated. I was going to write a book about, BigZebra.com said I was going to write a book about Marxism and science, then things really got crazy at work. Well, here you go. If you want to start from a framework, you can go to this book and look at theirs and then write that book about Marxism and science, because it seems like a very interesting, like they're only doing a brief thing here in this book, but it seems like a topic that people would want to read about. Let's go. All right, now I have to find my place. All right, here we go. Yes, new page. Science and technology have the potential to liberate all humanity from disease, poverty, and external risk. But this potential is not being realized because of the class monopoly over the wealth needed to finance and apply scientific knowledge. On the contrary, under capitalism, science and technology is a massively powerful weapon through which the exploitation and control of the labor force is maintained. Now, I'm not going to go too much into this. Obviously, this critique was being applied to the 19th century, and given how things have evolved, well, I'm not going to, this. When you look at university research and a lot of public funding for science and stuff, this isn't exactly how things turned out. That's not to say there's not values inherent in deciding who gets which grant research, but it's located more in the interests of academia, not so much being dictated by corporations. I'm not saying corporations don't fund scientific research at universities. I'm just saying it's not 100% how things get funded. Despite all this, Marx and Engels, especially the latter, were great enthusiasts for the scientific advances of their day, and declared their own view of history to be scientific, in contrast to the ideologies peddled by the other economists and social theorists, which mostly presented a distorted account of the social world favorable to the dominant class. There's a lot to unpack in there, but scientific socialism, this is kind of an interesting thing, because of this attempt to link or question empiricism and positivism and engage with some of the areas where it doesn't really apply is quite interesting. To the extent that many people, including members of the working class, lived according to such beliefs and did not question the existing system of class rule, there was an opposition between the distorted or false consciousness of common sense on the one hand and the scientific knowledge claimed by Marx and Engels on the other. So this is just touching on the idea of false class consciousness or false consciousness and them attempting to account for it. No. One could say, well, I'm not gonna get it. I'm not gonna get into the critiques or the comments on this. I'll present it and then y'all can talk about it. Since you're all being quiet, I'm just assuming that you're listening. So we are now 1, 2, 3 paragraphs away. If you have questions, comments, or other things, start to get those ready, because we're going to be done here in a little bit. These contrasts between science as objective and interest-free and ideology or common sense as distorted or false because of the influence of it on practical interest and values were carried forward by later Marxist sociology of knowledge. The focus in this tradition was on explaining distorted or false beliefs in terms of the social position of the group whose beliefs they were, in terms of the misleading appearance presented by social relations, or in terms of the cultural power of the economically dominant class and its allies in educational institutions or the media. Oh, the authoritarian left. So, as far as the natural sciences are concerned, Marxist approaches have tended to follow Marx himself in focusing on the role of science in the invention of technologies which enhance employer control over the labor force and enable the replacement of workers by machines. In Britain during the 1930s, there emerged a radical movement of scientists, part of which was greatly influenced by Marxist ideas. One of the focuses of this movement was resistance to the eugenics movement and its proposals for forced sterilization of the unfit. There you go, Marx standing up for human rights. This campaign won growing support as eugenics became increasingly identified with the Nazi regime in Germany and with the influential fascist movement in Britain. But the radical scientists were also concerned with the poor working conditions and the proletariatization of technical and support workers in research institutions, and the exclusion of scientists from areas of public policy making. To be honest, scientists don't always want to be dragged into public policy making, but they should be consulted and invited. As Worski has argued, however, the movement was by no means united, and the shared concern for the social relations of science covered rather different political positions. For some, the main aim was to increase the public standing and funding of science, whereas for the more radical figures, the potential of science to serve universal human need was obstructed by its increasing incorporation into industrial capitalism. Nothing less than a socialist revolution was required for science to be open to wider participation and social accountability. Key representatives of this radical perspective were J.D. Bernal, J.B.S. Haldane, J. Needham, and then there's a bunch of other. I'm going to presume white guys in this list. There remained ambiguity about what a socialist approach to science meant. Did it mean enabling the further development of science and technology in response to people's needs, as against priorities determined by profit and control? Or would socialist science be different in content from existing bourgeois science? At the time, Soviet scientists and philosophers were arguing for this latter position, and the mainly pro-Soviet radical scientists in Britain tended to adopt it until the notorious Lysenko episode in Soviet biology. In the name of proletarian science, Soviet geneticists were denounced as bourgeois and idealist. Many were arrested, some died. Soviet genetics was destroyed, and great damage was done to Soviet agriculture. This disaster divided the radical scientists in Britain and took radical visions of an alternative science off the agenda until the resurgence of scientific radicalism in the context of the U.S. war against Vietnam and the broad political radicalization of the late 1960s. At the start of the 1970s, many scientists involved in the newly formed British Society for Social Responsibility in Science were concerned, because it's written by Brits, so things are going to be like located geographically centered in Britain for a British audience, just FYI. Where was I again? The British Society for Social Responsibility in Science were concerned about abuses of science in the massive application of chemical weapons in Vietnam, in research on biological, chemical, and nuclear weaponry, in the use of CS gas in maintaining public order, in hazardous conditions of work, in surveillance technologies, in pollution, and so on. But again, a radical wing of the movement, influenced by Marxism, but also by the New Left's critique of Soviet state socialism, by the women's movement, and by anti-racist concerns, wanted to go further than denouncing individual abuses. For them, what was needed was an analysis of the institutional nexus of science, capitalist industry, and the state, and an integration of the radical science movement with a wider struggle for socialist transformation. One legacy of that period was the Radical Science Journal, later Science as Culture, which was arguably influential in the academic development of the new sociology of science. See below. And then the next one after this, you can't see because I'm blown out my lighting, is Weber, Merton, and the Sociology of Science, which is what we're going to do next time. So, sorry, it's been ages since I've read this book, and it's also like this way of looking at the history of Marx is not one that I spend a lot of time on, so it was really useful and helpful to me to go through this, not only to read it once and then to read it again to make the notes, and then to read it a third time to read it out to you. But having gone through that process, it locates the larger discourse about science and the fact that how we produce knowledge is not self-evident. especially the more complicated the object of our inquiry. And especially when what we're studying is a social system created by humans, because values inevitably come into those things. And so the question is, like, how do we handle values? Because values shape human behavior all the time. And to say that we can just sort of like objectify subjectivity and not really think about how it influences our process, or how we frame things is kind of silly. So yeah, we're going to continue on, and I think we're going to, let me look in the, is there an index to this? Yes, there is. How many times, I wonder if they got one for Marxism. I don't know how often this comes up. Marx, oh yes. Marx K, Marxism, 8, 10, 13, 50 through 3. Yeah, we're gonna talk about Marxism again and again and again. So we're gonna see how this proceeds into the future. All right. Oh, we've got a little bit of time left. I decided I'd rather sit and stew and really take the time with the Marx than try to rush through 2 sections. And as a consequence, we've got a little bit of time. Marx was such an idealist. Yes, Sib Wolf, I would agree with that, but of course we have the benefit of I'm not saying you're not saying this, but I think we would agree, shall we say, that Marx had this new insight, and when you have those like those insights, you start to sort of see them everywhere, and you see the potential. And obviously a lot of social reformists, people who want to make things better, I think have an inherent optimism, and so they see what good can be done, and then you give it to people who are crappy. Oh, I guess maybe I can transition now away from that, and then they ruin it. They take it and they go blah all over it. Andrew, if science serves the ruling class, as in the V and now more, it's not value-free either. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, too, that, I think Marx's notion of, is it possible for me, like, just to do, I'm looking for a screen where I could put myself, I know what I can do. Maybe. I'll go back to this screen and muck about with it. All right, hold on. So I'm trying to stream and think about wordings of questions and doing everything at the same time, and I can't, like, you can see me buffering. You can see my head buffer. All right. Yeah, so I think you'll be able to see that better now. I can actually bring y'all down like this. And make it bigger too. Woohoo! So, yes, so I think when we reflect on, and it was clearly a summary of it, but, and I don't know, I wasn't alive in the 19th century, but certainly when you look at how things have panned out, the internet has certainly democratized knowledge, and lots of people who have turned into autodidacts on several, so I think that in many ways the result of the science producing the internet actually liberated a lot of science. But of course, like, how could Marx see that? He couldn't. Had no idea of, his framework was, factory mass production assembly line work. And therefore, within that system, the technological advances that were being made were usually into, like, making your factory run more productively, or to do something more powerfully, or to get something somewhere faster. But that's not the only class, that's like the only way that science has been controlled since. So yes, I'm kind of like, I might just duck out early, guys, unless you have something else to say, because I'm mostly just prepared the Marx and science thing for today, and that's about it. But I can give you a little preview, perhaps. I'll just dip in. Max Weber may be taken as the starting point for an alternative tradition of social thinking about science. I'll plant some seeds for next time. Weber linked the growth of science with the increasing pervasive rationalization and disenchantment of life under modern capitalist civilization. The norms of science demanded intellectual integrity and a value-free commitment to empirical truth. Paradoxically, however, this meant that the attitude of the scientist to his, Weber doesn't discuss science as a possible vocation for women! Exclamation mark. Thank you, authors. Vocation was one which could be understood only as a species of value-oriented rationality. Science was to be viewed as a distinct value sphere, independent of the various instrumental purposes to which its findings may be put. So that's what we're going to look at next time. I'm starting to discuss that part of Weber. It feels weird ending early, but on the other hand, like I got nothing. I got nothing else for you guys. What do you think of the setup, by the way? I'm having to learn where to put my eyes, so that's taking me a little bit of time. But if you want to just give me a little feedback on that, I'd appreciate it. I think we're just gonna dip out early. You guys want to, class ends early? You want to go get out of class 15 minutes early and go start on your homework? All right, since we've got a little time, I know what I can do. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to recommend to you guys something completely different. I'm going to recommend to you an amazing video that I found. It's not new. I think it's about a year old. However, it has 1.2 million views, which and the video is on let me get up my history because I watched it yesterday, and maybe you've seen it. It's about how basically what's called music theory is racist. Super racist. All right, and it's an excellent video. All right, so let me pull it up here. It is long. The person does some tongue-in-cheek. Adam Neely here does some kind of tongue-in-cheek knocking, as it were. I'll move this over. This is better centered. Of critical race theory. He kind of like talks about it at the beginning, but actually he brings it back and talks about structures at the end, so I forgave him. But this video, I will put it in the chat, because this is what you should go watch after I sign off. Music theory and white supremacy. And there's one section in particular where he just freaking nails it. Oh yeah, it's the Schenker section where he just talks about how everything, all of the underlying values of established music theory was set up around just loving German-speaking white guys who wrote a certain kind of music, who wrote music for their time. And so there's like a selection bias. If they thought German culture was the best and most and should be the most dominant culture, and therefore German German-speaking composers were representatives of that culture, and then you go and you study their works and study their structures of their music, and from it you pull out your music theory and say, this is the metric, these are the theories by which we should judge all music. You're basically saying your objective standard is actually white German-speaking 18th century German aesthetics is the objective standard. And the guy does it in a really super good, like, step-by-step approach. It's, what is it, like over an hour long, that video? Or almost an hour long? 50 minutes? Let me check again. 44 minutes. You know, I know people laugh about, or laugh at that old meme where, you know, Anita Sarkeesian was talking about when she first started to open up her eyes to something and seeing the influence of bigotry in how affects, like the outcomes that we're experiencing of policy or laws or social structures or whatever. And she said, you know, everything is racist and everything is sexist. You know, this is like one of those things, like if you said to someone, you know, federal highways are racist, or music theory is white supremacy, on its face it looks like a really shocking comment. It looks like something, it sounds like something ridiculous. But then you walk through, you know, like, well, if you look at how federal funding was allotted and where white-controlled political institutions chose to put highways, and you see that there is disproportionate effects on Black communities or poor, white, and diverse communities, the suburbs are protected, the rich people are protected, and this pattern happens over and over and over again. It's not geography that's making those, determinations. That's racist white people deciding they don't want the highway in their backyard, right? And again, this is the same way that music theory, which aspires to scientific objectivity, right? That's the whole idea of a theory, is it's meant to be value neutral. Actually, values are embedded all the way through. Assumptions are embedded all the way through. And those values are of white supremacists. They're centering whiteness as the highest standard. And so, by that metric, no African music, no Asian music, no Indian Indian music can ever be genius, because they're not working within that framework of a white genius, of white values, of what white people have decided is the objective standard. So if we had taken, for instance, so that he talks often about the pedagogic approach of music in Africa, which includes dancing, then Bach's, there's some music that you can't dance to, and therefore it's not music. So it's just a really, really super good. Oh, is he cut off? Why is he cut off in your view? And that's weird to me. Oh, I see, because my camera. All right, let me move. There we go. Oh my gosh, I'm so big. All right, there we go. How about that? That's a little bit better, I think. All right, let me do that. Boom. Okay, that's a bit more balanced. Still working out the system. Go watch Music Theory and White Supremacy. You will learn a lot, and you'll be able to have conversations about structural racism, not just in the correction system or in, in education. People are used to that, and they go, oh, racists will say Black people are just more criminal, right? And they'll blame Black people for the racial bias and oppression, sentencing, conviction on them in order to avoid it. But when you talk about, sort of like white supremacy and music theory, expand these things out, it kind of challenges their ability to just blame Black people for their own oppression and their own suffering. So, if you understand this topic and you can engage with someone who is a white person who's very defensive about accusations of racism, you kind of use this as an example to open up the door to this idea that objectivity sometimes isn't objectivity. Sometimes racism is racism masquerading as objectivity. All right, y'all. 10-2. That's it. I'm done. I'll check the chat, see if you guys had anything else to say. Otherwise, cultural chauvinism. Yep. Cargon of Akkad. Yeah, certainly. I mean, what Carl is basically stated repeatedly. I mean, he's culturally racist. He wants to preserve white dominance in Britain because he associates British culture with whiteness, not with British people. Like, a British person can't contribute to British culture in his view unless it's like filtered through a whiteness. White middle class people love their not in my backyard-ism. Absolutely. DN fan says, you mean like the woman talking about the male power fantasies in video games that became a meme because men on the internet hate feminism? Absolutely. Absolutely. Alright guys, yeah, I'm gonna stop babbling now. I feel like I've done enough time. I work for free for you guys anyway. It's not like I get paid for it. So I still feel this obligation to produce at least an hour of interesting content every Sunday. But as it is, I have to, I've been putting off editing the last bits of my book, which I'm going to submit this next week. So that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks, maybe a couple months time. So I need to go do that. And I need to get ready for my D&D game. So I think this is where we're going to shut it down, peeps. Thank you for coming by. Thank you for listening to my being all nerdy. You guys are the elite. You are the creme de la creme. You are the, what do they call it? There's a word for it, with Iado. Intelligentsia. That's what I like of YouTube. And for those of you who want to watch my D&D channel, yeah, go ahead and check out this way. Check out the link that I think Sybil put in the chat. And otherwise, have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful time until the next time we see each other again. I have a great Sunday or Monday, wherever it is, whenever it is you are. I've been Kristi. You guys have been awesome, and we'll see each other again really soon. Okay. Bye.